Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 3 live stream for the Mexico Open. Happy Friday to everyone out there. Hopefully you're having a solid start to your weekend and are ready to talk a little bit of golf action for the weekend over there in Vidanta. Going to take a look at the course, bring you guys the info you need heading into round 3, and then touch on what to expect for Showdown and on the prop side of things to help you get your process started. So first off, welcome on in. I see we got Deuce down there in chat. First in terms of attendance. Cheers to you. We got Carl down there as well. Actually have a little bit of a Crown and Coke here in the Chick-fil-A cup. So enjoying ourselves here on this Friday. And like I said, stoked to get after it for this weekend. What's going on, Carl? And everyone else that'll be filing into the live chat here over the next few minutes. Let's go ahead and start it off, right? Take a look at the golf course from today and what we saw from the golf course, which was a slightly easier scoring average, especially during the morning hours. Kind of like day one, the winds were lower in the morning than the afternoon. And in general, temperatures were a little bit higher out there for today than what you saw for the first day. And the ball was flying. A lot of the longer holes didn't play nearly as difficult here for today as what we saw for Thursday's action. And especially, like I said, during the morning hours, you saw these guys absolutely tear it up. About a 1.2 under par scoring average, which if we take a look at the 2 days, effectively, we had right around like a 1.4, 1.5 shot advantage, which was something that I didn't see with the weather forecast. I couldn't see how you could have possibly forecasted that. But as we always say, right, on those Wednesday live streams, it's usually worth taking, 10, maybe 15% of your lineups and blindly stacking for either wave, because this happens a whole lot more than it doesn't, right? After a day or two, usually there's like a 0.5 to maybe a shot difference between the two waves. When you get something like 1.4, 1.5 shots, like we got here for days 1 and 2, that's where it starts to matter, right? That's where it starts to impact your made cut percentage, your ceiling performances over the first 2 rounds. And it's not going to win you a GPP, right? Going out there and stacking the right wave, but it is certainly going to set you up for a shot at it if you can pull it off the right way. So I did stack a few of the, PM guys, right, that got that slight advantage. But they aren't even my top GPP lineups right now. So I think if I would have leaned into it a little bit more, we could have capitalized on that. But just, as I was saying, I didn't see a clear advantage. I also stacked the bad wave, right, in like 10, 15% of lineups. I had guys that were starting in the AM, PM wave that didn't get quite the same kind of conditions as the other set of players. So it can go in both directions, right? So just wanted to point that out, something that we noticed over the first 2 rounds. But in round 2, definitely was a little bit more scoreable than what you had in round 1, likely due to that temperature change. Speaking of the weather, out here for round 3, it looks pretty spot on line with what we had the first 2 days. For the first 3-4 hours, there's going to be next to no wind. And then when you get into the afternoon, the sustained and the wind gusts go up a little bit. They're only calling for like 7-8 miles an hour. Also for the wind gusts, only like 13 to 16 mile an hour wind gusts. But I'll tell you that they called for the same things Thursday and today in terms of a weather forecast. We got much more significant winds in the afternoon. So if that's going to be a trend that continues into the weekend, expect to see somewhere around like 10, maybe even 15 mile an hour sustained winds and around 20, maybe even 25 mile an hour wind gusts. If that is going to hold from what we saw for days 1 and 2. So in terms of trying to stack or, find an advantage, right? Today, there was that clear about 1 shot advantage, right? Between the 2 waves, a little bit over a shot advantage between the AM and the PM guys. You probably want to lean into that for Showdown, right? Now, tee times are about to be released. They may have actually just been released. So let's go ahead and double check on that. But if they're going off in 2 sums, which they are, off of hole number 1, these AM wave golfers that are also the players at the bottom of the leaderboard are going to be aggressive. They're going to be lower owned because all of the chalk, right, all of the ownership is usually on that top end of the leaderboard. And they're going to have the nuts conditions, right? So this is one of the Showdown slates, particularly for a round 3 Showdown, that could be one to really take advantage of because we have that weather advantage locked in. We have the game theory advantage in, kind of walking in lockstep with what we have here with this weather edge. And if you play the 2 together, these are the kind of slates when you get them right, you can go and have a really good shot to take it all down just by playing a little bit of a weather edge. So it's good to see that we did get 2 sums off of hole number 1. No hole number 1 in 10 BS. We don't have 3 sums to worry about. A lot of that because we only had 65 guys make the cut. So a little bit easier to send them off in 2 sums. and you only have to worry about 65 players out there on the golf course at any point. So I love that. It gives us a bigger advantage out there from the Showdown side. And given that we did have about a stroke advantage, it's probably going to be at least a half a stroke out there tomorrow. Now, I'll put a little bit of an asterisk on that, right? I'm not expecting a full stroke advantage because the talent level difference is going to favor the PM wave guys, right? You've got guys that are in better form than the guys who were hardly scraping by and making the cut. And while obviously there's going to be a little bit of regression, right? You're going to get some ceiling rounds from some of the guys further down the board. In general, the guys up here in the top 10, top 15 are playing just a little bit better than the guys going off early. So in terms of scoring average, I don't think it's going to be as wide a range as what we saw out there for round 2, but it wouldn't surprise me for it to be about a half shot difference, right? For that talent gap to kind of make up for the condition change. But in terms of ceiling performances, I think it might be a 50-50 split, right? It might be 3 chalky guys, 3 guys down towards the bottom of the board. And sure, you can mix in a piece of chalk or 2 into your lineups, but where you're going to win or lose the GPP, where all of your leverage is going to come from, are the guys going off early, right? Trying to get a few of those players into lineups is going to be the key to going out there and taking something down. So that's what I've got from the weather angle. We'll circle back on this a little bit later when we go through the prop side, right? And trying to figure out how the course is going to play. But I'd say for round 3, normally pin locations are pretty soft. We're actually going to go hole by hole a little bit later and confirm that for ourselves. But if we end up with soft pins, which again, I haven't gone through these yet, so we're going to have to do so later on. If they're soft with the relatively soft weather conditions that we're seeing, I would project around a 1 under par scoring average, maybe slightly better than a 1 under par scoring average. So just a few things to keep an eye on out there for your round 3 process. But now let's take a look at the DFS side of things and a few of the players I'll be taking for Showdown. So let me bring up that screen. Let's see who's down there in chat now. What's going on, Michael? Cheers to you. Do we know what the 6 of 6 rate is? Not off the top of my head, but I'll double check for you right now. So we'll go to Cut Sweats, which if you have a Twitter, make sure to check them out over there on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it at this point. They tweet out all of the 6 of 6 percentages. And speaking of, let me just go ahead and share my screen, right? They tweeted this out a little bit ago. This is the latest look at the 6 of 6 rate. And at -2, it's about a 5% rate at most. You have a few contests where it's closer to like 4%. It looks like that is some of the higher dollar stuff where you have closer to a 4% 6 of 6. But yeah, 4 or 5% across the industry, which is, I would say, pretty average, right? There are some weeks where it's 10-15%. There are weeks where it's 1-2% in terms of 6 for 6. So I wouldn't say it's in either extreme, right? Kind of just pretty typical in terms of what we see in a 6 of 6 percentage. But yeah, if you haven't followed them yet, make sure to check them out. An absolute must follow for anyone out there playing PGA DFS. It just makes it so easy to go out there and see how your lineups are doing, right? And they have a service out there too where you can track your own lineups, which is pretty sweet on its own mind. Sorry, shared the wrong screen there. Going to go back to our DFS sheet and go through this chat here a little bit more. We got the Woo brothers did well. They did, that's for sure. What's going on, James? Cheers. What's going on, Francis? Chandler says, Stevens can kick your ass. You were very surprised with him. Ortiz had a hell of a week. That's for damn sure, right? His brother Carlos, of course, tour winner on the PGA Tour. Pretty impressive. And I'm pretty sure Stevens isn't even playing that bad. So I don't know what you're saying, Chandler. Get a few drinks in here or something this Friday, right? Just relax a little bit. He's not even playing that bad. You have 5 guys in the top 10. That's, hey, especially if you only played one lineup, which it kind of sounds like it, right? If you're saying you have 5 guys in the top 10, that's a hell of a start, right? And maybe you're talking outright card where you have a few guys up there in contention. It's a heck of a start. So let's keep it going. Best of luck out there. Fingers crossed, right? It's hard to hold on to the top of a GPP. It's hard to hold on to some of those outrights, but I would certainly want to be in first place rather than not, right? Or have all those guys at the top and not. Let's talk through some of our strategy, which unfortunately kind of leans into what we were just talking about, right? It's hard to hold on to the top of the leaderboard. When I'm playing round 3 Showdown, I'm always trying to find some kind of weather edge, which it does look like we have that with some of the earlier tee times. But on top of that, I try and fade some of the chalk up top because just like round 2 Showdown, you guys were here for yesterday's show, you know that all of the ownership condenses on the guys that had a good round. And now that we've had 2 rounds in play, it's going to condense even more so on the top of the leaderboard. So somebody like an Eric Van Rooyen, right? A Jake Knapp at -11 who continues to just hit the ball like an absolute monster. But these guys at -11, like a Matt Wallace, Sammy Valimaki, for example, are all way higher owned than they otherwise would be just because of their position. And in round 3 Showdown, same thing as round 2 Showdown, there's no such thing as placement points. So all of that is built into the fact that they have better form. And the fact of the matter is, and there's a lot of math that's been put behind this, right? This isn't just, touts saying this at this point. When somebody's like 2-3 times the ownership in Showdown, there are no shots gained metrics. There is no solid, level of form that makes them that much of a better play to be that 2-3 times higher ownership. And when you have a round 3 Showdown where you don't even have placement points, right? You could say a lot of that about Sunday Showdown, about guys starting towards the top end of the board, not quite being worth all that extra ownership. For rounds 2 and 3 Showdown, where there aren't even placement points in play, it's even more so the case, right? They're not starting with 12 placement points, 5-6 placement points, or being up there in the top 5. Starting with the same amount as everyone else in the field. So up top, it's maybe not as obvious with the fact that those guys are being the chalk. There's just a lot of ownership in general, right, on the guys up here in the 9K plus range. But when you start to get down here to the 8s, right, it's obvious when Jake Knapp is 27.4% projected owned, where we have somebody like Davis Thompson at 10.7%, right? Rio Hisatune, right, we got at 9.6% ownership. Brandon Wu, who's just at -4, right, not even all that much better. Course history, right, gives him a little bit of a bump too, but he's almost twice the ownership, right, as what we have with Rio. So the strategy for round 2 Showdown, it's the same thing out here for round 3, is to take the pivots, right? And you can be a few chalky guys that you're taking, right? So Jake Knapp, for example, I don't know if I could fault you for playing him tomorrow because of how good his ball striking's been, but you shouldn't be playing only chalk, right? So let's say you're taking a Jake Knapp. Don't start with an Eric Van Rooyen or a Tony Finau, right? Try and get a little bit different with one of your other spend-up options, because if you're going to start a Tony Finau, Jake Knapp is the second man in, you're going to have a lot of trouble differentiating with the other 4 spots. You're going to have to force in guys that are uncomfortable to play, whereas if you're just maybe a little bit more modest with your ownership, right? Maybe a little bit more careful about taking some of the chalk up top, you have a little bit more freedom, right, down there in the 7 and 8K range. So you can take chalk, right, if you really want to play some of these guys that are going to be 25, 30% owned. Just you have to be cognizant. You have to be intentional about trying to differentiate at other spots, right? When you're clicking those names into lineups, you really have to remind yourself to try and get different at least 2-3 other spots. On the players I like, right, it'd be like a Nikolai Hogard, who is slightly lower owned than some of the other guys around him. I would say in higher stakes contests, the ownership will be a little bit more polarized. So somebody like Hogard, I would say in like a $50, maybe $100 single entry, is probably going to be closer to 15% owned, while somebody like Tony Finau would probably be at least 33, maybe even 35% owned. The reason for that is when people start putting up more money into their lineups, you get the psychological factor coming in. People not wanting to play as aggressively, right? Maybe being a little bit more conservative when they have more money on the line. And that has a huge impact out there with ownership. You can say that it's also the sharps, right? They're out there playing the higher dollar stuff. I would say that also leads to some of the more condensed ownership, but a lot of it is also scared money, right? People that aren't willing to go out there and take shots on guys that aren't in quite as solid form. And for me, especially in like a single entry kind of contest, that's where the upside lies with the Nikolai Hogard. So love him there at a 45.7 point projection. I believe he's the number 2 projected player in my pool, right? Behind, obviously, Tony Finau, right? Who's up there in terms of projection. But at 45.7 points, that's quite healthy out there for $11,200. Not quite up there, right, with the Rory McIlroy scores that we see in like an elevated field. But we have to adjust our expectations a little bit, given that it's such a weak field and a showdown slate. Down here in the 9K range, somebody like Keith Mitchell, or in this case, who we're going to talk about, right, at Davis Thompson at 10.7%, are also extremely viable as pivot options, right? So even taking a Hogard up top at like 20%, if you started a lineup there, you got to get a little bit different down here in the 9K range, right? I'm not a huge fan of taking a chalky player like an EVR. Even a Patrick Rogers, I've got at 22.5%. It's kind of like the Olesen from today, right? We faded him for our showdown lineups because of that higher ownership, because it's so hard to go out there and back up a low round. And he ended up shooting like 1 under par, which isn't horrible. It's not like he went nuclear in the wrong direction, but at the same time, he was far from an optimal showdown play. So kind of like Olesen yesterday, right? Eric Van Rooyen is a player that I'm kind of worried about ownership-wise. Same thing with Jake Knapp. So I prefer the guys that are a little bit more moderate, a little bit more reasonable when it comes to their ownership projections, because there's not much separating these players, right? Like if we look at the projected points across the board, right, with guys down here in the 9Ks, it's hardly a difference. It's like a 1-2 point difference, right, at the very most. Some of the guys like Jake Knapp, right, that's been hitting the ball so well, like I kind of understand why he's going to be chalky. But when I know that golf is such a variant sport, I know that guys like EVR, for example, right, he didn't even have the best day today, said that he woke up and just didn't really feel it, right, out there for Friday. When I know that's a factor in golf, right, I'll fade anybody, right? That's extremely high owned. And when Jake Knapp's going to be 27.4%, you have guys like Hubbard at 17%. Again, Hisatune, Thompson, Mitchell, that are all half the ownership or less of somebody like a Jake Knapp. I'm going to make those pivots all day. So it's just the strategy that I've used for the last few years out here for Showdown, especially for rounds 2 and 3. And it's been a tried and true formula. It's worked extremely well. We've grinded out our best ROI out there in rounds 2 and 3 Showdown. And it's because of the kind of game theory opportunities that we have at our disposal. Down in the 8K range, guys like Mav McNeely, Johnny Vegas, top end of the 7K range make quite a bit of sense. -2 for McNeely, -3 for Johnny Vegas. We know they're going to have relatively early tee times. The ownership is relatively average, right? They're like 10, 11% owned a piece there. So it's easy to get leverage to the field. And you have guys around them a little bit more chalky, right? Like a Doug Gim, Brandon Wu, who are like 16, 17%. Right, Cameron Champ, I've got it like 17% ownership right here. Johnny Vegas, Mav McNeely, because of their birdie or better upside, are better Showdown plays, right? If you just look at their projected points, a lot of them are comparable, if not better projections-wise, than some of the guys that are higher owned. So why not take the shot on the player that's long-term been a better scorer in this format? And also for tomorrow is going to be the lower-owned option. So that's the idea with those two there. Garrett Higo, Victor Perez. This is where I'm trying to get a ton of leverage. And of course, right, the plays we're going over here are far from the only that I'm taking. For access to everything that's blacked out, check out the Patreon page. But when I'm down here in the bottom end of the 7s, or especially in the 6K range, I'm trying to get different, right? I'm trying to take guys that are sub 5% owned. So guys like Sammy Valimaki, right? Guys that are like 8, 11% owned even, right? Like an Andrew Novak here, just aren't my cup of tea, right? I'm trying to get different to the field down here with some of my value plays, because all of these guys, just like the guys in the 8 and 9K range, their projections are hardly different than the others, right? I mean, sure, maybe there's like a 4 or 5 point projection difference in terms of your highest versus lowest projections. But for your average player, right, if you're doing just a head-to-head matchup, it's usually not much separating those players. So for somebody like Higo, Victor Perez, high upside ball strikers, also bombers off the tee that fit the course quite well, to only be right at sub 4% ownership numbers, I'll take that all day. So Garrett Higo, we've seen him blow up Showdown slates before. He's an extremely volatile player. Victor Perez coming over from the DP World Tour, I'm kind of known for that same thing, right? A little bit of a loose cannon, not very consistent out there on the DP World Tour, but has had rounds where he's gone out there and sniffed 60. So like that at $7,100. Down here in the 6K range, we've got two guys I want to point out. And the guy that I'm playing, at least in terms of like a highlighted player here that we're talking about, that's the highest up on the leaderboard, is Carl Juan, right? And he's probably the highest owned player that I'm taking down towards the bottom end of the board. The reason why is I'm going to ride with that guy on Twitter. So this is just a little bit of a narrative play, but obviously liked him heading into the week. I have an outright bet on Carl Juan. And I can tell you one thing. He's either going to go for the top end of the board tomorrow on moving day, or he's going to go out there and shoot like 6-7 over par. And for a Showdown type of format, that's exactly what we want, right? We want somebody that's either extremely on. We don't really care if they have an okay round. At least for me, who's playing in large field GPPs, I am all about that ceiling performance. And Carl Juan has shown himself to have an extremely wide range of outcomes, hits his ceiling performance quite often out there on the PGA Tour. Just unfortunately is also extremely inconsistent, right? Has quite a few blow up rounds to offset a lot of the good that he does. So we'll see. We'll see if that guy that has all that money on Carl Juan ends up getting paid off on that. But yeah, he's like 10.8% owned. So if you're looking to get different down here in the 6K range, he is not your guy, right? He's in fact pretty chalky down here in the 6K range. But if you're going to get different, you can go down to a $6,000 Austin Smotherman. So obviously, a lot of the utility with a $6,000 player is the salary that you're saving. So that's part of the reason in wanting to play a Smotherman here. And on top of that, he's been ball striking it well, right? He's a long player off the tee, fits this golf course quite well, and he's only 2.8% owned. So I like that. I like the fact that he's, played pretty well in the Korn Ferry Tour when he's gone out there and played here in 2024. All of that, I think, some pretty solid play out here for this tournament, and especially for round 3. So if you don't know why he wasn't talked up for a lot of the main slate stuff, that's because he was a late placement for a withdrawal. So out there on Thursday morning, I forget who exactly withdrew, but he took their place. And I think a lot of projection sources out there might not even have Austin Smotherman in their projections. And if that's going to be the case, maybe he's lower owned than he possibly should be. I know I was checking on this stochastic optimizer. They didn't even have him on the Showdown projections. So there could be an advantage to be had, right? To playing some of these guys that were late ads. And at least to my knowledge, I believe he's the only one that made the cut that would fit that category. But check it out on your fantasy site, right? Make sure they have Austin Smotherman in there. And if they don't, make sure to get him into some lineups, right? You don't want to be somebody that's avoiding somebody because your fantasy site didn't have them up, right? That would kind of suck. What's going on, Jimmy? Great read on Mark Hubbard for round 2. Appreciate that, Asian. Juan paired with Bramlett again, too. Oh, I didn't see the pairings, but yeah, maybe they have some good juju, right? Played pretty well today. Bramlett, too. He loves this golf course. I know he said that in a few interviews. He's also a pretty intriguing play, I'll say, out there for the next round. Let's bring up DraftKings. We're going to do a little lineup construction segment and then hop on over into props. So if you guys have anything you want to talk about for DFS, any players you want my takes on, let me know now, because if not, we're going to talk about props here in a minute. So in terms of lineup construction, with how different I am, right, my contrarian stance against a lot of the chalk, I don't have to think very much when I'm building my lineup. So kind of like yesterday, I can kind of just mix and match the guys that I'm using in my player pool. So just using some of the guys we had here in the highlighted video, you go ahead and build a lineup real easily, right? Just using those as a core. You take those 3 up top. All of them are relatively pivots. Down here in the 7K range, who was the guy we talked up, right? Higo was one of them. I know it's $7,300. And just build a lineup and kind of mix and match all of your guys, right? When you're taking pivots at almost every spot, right, it accomplishes all of that differentiation for you. Whereas if you started with, let's say, a Tony Finau, your second man in was a relatively chalky Jake Knapp, right, at $8,900. Well, now you really have to think about your ownership, right? So maybe rather than going down here and taking a Johnny Vegas, who's like 10% owned, you have to really try and get different, right? And to really get different in this range, there's not a lot of guys you can accomplish that with. In fact, if I'm looking at my ownership projections and trying to find the lowest owned player, it looks like it's Carson Young. They're at 8.9%. So you'd have to force in somebody that's a little bit of a pivot there. So let's go ahead and just throw Carson Young in. Down here towards the middle, bottom end of the 7K range, we've also got to find another pivot. So I guess Higo would work, right, at -2. You could use him as that pivot option, but you're having to make decisions down here that you normally wouldn't want to make, right? So for our next 7K option, right, we've got to get mega different. And rather than taking somebody like a Vegas or a Bramlett, who I really like for the next round, you go out there and take an Austin Eckroat at slightly lower ownership. So that's just, it's not the best kind of lineup construction, right? I like a little bit more freedom, flexibility when I'm building my lineups. And speaking of that guy who said screw Stevens, I agree with you now. I didn't realize he missed the cut. What the hell did he do? Good thing I didn't bet on him outright or anything, because I'd be really pissed. At least I have Carl Juan in it. Holy shit, look at that. He went bogey, double bogey. I take it back. Screw him. That is unacceptable. I mean, look at this back 9, right? What is it? 4 over his last 3. He also had a double on 2 and a bogey on 4. I get the frustration now. I didn't realize that. And that's like 15, 16% of my lineups right there that are dead. So lovely. You love to see that on a Friday. Hey, happens all the time. That's for damn sure. All right, let's talk about some props now. So in terms of our props reads, I want to start over here with the tee sheet. So let me go ahead and bring up Tourcast so we can go through some of these pin locations together. So main reason for that is I think that pins on top of weather are two of the main things that we have to look at for the prop side that people don't do their due diligence on, right? Like people look at the weather, they'll, a lot of times be looking at a site like Wind Finder, right? Or something like wind.com, Willy Weather to try and figure out their weather. You have to be looking at advanced models, right? You need to be looking at different weather sources to try and figure out what the hell you're doing. And on top of that, you need to know what kind of pin locations these players are playing into. And kind of like I was saying before, usually moving day pins are a little bit easier than what we see for the first few days. So let's see if that's backed up here, right? Let's not speculate on the kind of course that we're going to see. So let me bring up hole number one. It looks like it was a front pin location over here away from the water. So the pin location's like over here in this front cove. I would say that it's kind of in line with what we had today, right? It's going to play a little bit shorter, which I think will help the players. It's playing a little bit closer to the water, so adding a little bit of that risk-reward aspect while giving these guys a shorter club in hand. So I think the hole number one will probably play to a similar type of average, but I do think that you'll see slightly more birdies at this type of pin location in more doubles because of that water to the right. So you'll have some blow-up holes, but you will see a little bit more scoring there at hole number one. Hole two is a back middle pin location. So this is a longer par four. So the fact that it's a back pin kind of helps these players out. What you don't want to see on these longer holes is a front pin with a lot of slope around it. So believe it or not, I think the hardest pin out here for hole number two would probably be up here in the top left. So the fact that it's back here in that back right ledge, where you do have a little bit of slope that gives a little bit of a backstop nature here, I think makes it play to a similar, if not easier, scoring average than what we had for today. So a little bit of a hot take there, right? With the fact that it's going to play a little bit longer, but easier. But you'll see that with some of these longer par fours. When you're hitting something that's like a 7-iron or longer in, you need a little bit of room for that ball to land out, especially if it's not a dartboard. Let's see. Hole number three is like a middle left pin. I might even say like a middle back pin over there on this like middle left ledge. Get a little bit of slope that'll help you get it closer to the hole. I would say pretty spot in line with what we had for round two. I would be kind of hard pressed to say it's easier because it's going to play slightly longer. You also do have to play closer to the sand hazard to the left, but the slopes are going to help you in terms of setting up birdie looks. Hole four is another longer par four. So this one is a front pin, which can be a little bit tricky, right? So here at hole number four, I don't think you're going to see a lot of birdies. You're just going to have a hard time getting it close to this pin location. I do have to say, though, right, if you have like a long, like 30, 40-foot putt coming from this backside of the green, there's not a whole lot of slope here to trip you up, right? There's not that massive ledge, which is going to lead you to hitting it like 6-7 feet past the hole. You're not going to have a hard time lagging it up here towards the front side. So I think in general, it's going to play to a similar scoring average as what we had for today, if not slightly easier because it's not quite as tucked far back there in the back right. My apologies. Hopefully that one wasn't as loud as the last cough. Next up, we have hole number five, which is over here on the middle right side of the green. So it's over here in this large broadside, away from the water hazard, also away from that pesky bunker to the left side. Going to play to a similar scoring average, right? Similar distance in terms of its depth into the green. But I would say easier because it's over there towards the right side. Next up, we have hole number six, which is in the way back. So this hole is going to play a lot longer than what we had for today. And this is the first pin location that I'll say looks a little bit harder, what we had for round two. Round two, right, it was up here in the front, right, played a lot shorter. You can get up and down row easily out of both of these bunkers. Here in the back, you have to hit a lot more of a quality shot to get there in two. So I think you're going to see slightly less birdies here at number six, but it's still par five, right? It's still going to be an easy hole. Hole seven is a middle left pin location. This is a drivable par four. One thing I'll say is that this pin location to the left is a lot harder than what we had for day one, where it was over here in the front side of the green. For today, over here on the right side, you had quite a bit of room to get up and down, right? Even if you missed over here to the right. Over here on the left, it's a little bit tricky with that bunker there, right? If you hit it short, you have to hit a little flop shot over the bunker to try and get it close. It's closer to that penalty area to the left, and your around the green shot, right, is longer across the green. So I don't think it's impossible to get up and down. In fact, I still think it's going to be like the easiest hole on the golf course. It's just that the around the green shots to get up and down to this pin location, which is kind of close to where this number one is, over here for round three, is I think a little bit harder to come by. Just maybe not as straightforward especially compared to what we had in round 1. Let's get to hole number 8. I don't know why I went to hole 4 there. Hole 8's over here in the back right corner. It's a longer hole, right? It's one of those longer par 4s. So kind of like I was saying earlier, these back pin locations aren't nearly as daunting as you might expect on some of these longer holes. So I would say a pretty similar scoring average. This one that was up here on this ledge, right? You had this slope behind the hole, which made these shots misses to the left extremely difficult. I actually think it might play easier out there for tomorrow, even with the longer distance. Hole number 9 is a front pin location. This is a par 3. So having that front pin is going to make things a lot easier. You do also have a little bit of a backstop to work with and a side stop over here to the right side. So I would expect to see a lot more birdies at hole 9. In fact, I think that one will play a whole lot easier than what we saw for days 1 and 2. Hole 10 is a middle right pin location. So this is a long, harder par 4. It's a little bit on top of a crest over here. You can see you got some slope, which will take the ball down into this little low spot. I don't love that. 10's a hard hole to begin with. This pin location looks a little bit tricky. So you're probably going to see quite a few bogeys there, as you've seen over the first 2 days. Hole number 11 is a back left pin location. So it's over here on the left side. I would say pretty neutral, all things considered, right? It's away from the water, which I do think will help players avoid some of the big numbers. The ups and downs from the left, there's not a whole lot of slope over here. So I do think that it's a doable up and down. I'd say pretty average compared to days 1 and 2. I don't think it's a whole lot easier. Don't think it's a whole lot harder. Let's get a drink in us, and then let's see. 12 looks like a front left pin location. So it's a par 5. Longer par 5, and it'll play easier than what we had today just because of the pure distance, right? This back pin location played 662 yards. Now it's going to play about 40, 50 yards shorter, right? Like 610 yards. A lot of players were getting it up near this green in 2. And if you get it up greenside here, the up and down to this front pin location is not going to be that tricky. So I do think you see a lot more birdies at hole number 12 tomorrow. 13 is another front pin location. It's over here on this like front right peninsula, just like hole number 9. It's playing to a shorter length. It's also away from some of that trouble, some of that slope towards the middle portion of the screen. I think it'll play easier out there for moving day. So far, just to kind of summarize, right, we've had quite a few holes. They're going to play easier, like 2 or 3 they're going to be neutral, and then 1 so far that's going to play harder. So I would say, right, looks like a moving day setup so far, but let's finish this out, right? Let's go through them all. Hole 14 is a front pin location. So once again, another par 5. That's a front pin, undoubtedly easier. It's away from the water. If you get it up there, greenside in 2, it's a real simple up and down to get a birdie. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of birdies at hole 14. 15 is a middle left pin. So this is tricky because it's close to the water over here. This is another harder pin location, right? You're going to see extra bogeys over here to the left side. And it's going to be harder to make a birdie on because you don't want to be as aggressive and hit it into that water. Hole 16 is a right side pin location. It's another longer hole, so it's not really a birdie look to begin with. But I would say in terms of scoring average, it's probably pretty similar to what we had today, right? I know it's playing slightly longer with this right side pin tucked over here in this right peninsula, but at the same time, it's a longer hole, right? Having that extra room to hit into the green might actually be a little bit beneficial. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. Probably pretty neutral. Hole number 17 is also tucked near the water. So this is like a quintessential moving day pin sheet, right? We have quite a few holes that are easier, and then we've got holes that are hard, right, in a few cases, and then a few that are tucked near water. So it's playing shorter, right? You have that shorter pin location. I would venture to say that because this is tucked so close to this bunker, as guys can see from this overhead view, that they're going to move the tee box. And they do this a lot of moving day. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if on some of the par 5s, they move around the tee box. Heck, even on that drivable par 4 7th, they might move up the tee box to only make it like 260 yards. If they move it over here to one of these tee boxes, it would give players a more realistic angle into that sort of pin location. It would make this hole a birdie look for sure, right? It would shorten it by like 40 yards. It'd only be like 165 yards into that kind of pin location. And you'd have a much better angle, not having to go over the water, right? Or carry that bunker to try and get it close. So that's something to keep an eye on out there tomorrow morning. If you're keeping an eye on the setup, let me know if you see anything at hole number 17. And then lastly, at hole 18, it's a middle right pin. This is another par 5. I would say a pretty neutral pin location for a par 5, just because it's a pretty flat green, right? It doesn't have that much depth to it. There's not really a spot on the screen where everything funnels to, except for here in this like middle portion. So a pretty neutral pin location, right? Not easier than what we had for today, not harder as well. The miss for tomorrow is going to be over here on the right side. I know it's short-sided, but there's not all that much slope to worry about, right? You're not hitting down a massive slope over here on the right, so you should be able to stop the ball relatively close to the hole. So looks like a classic moving day setup. Like I said, some holes that are going to be devilish, like what we have with 15 and 17. And then a lot of the holes that you're just trying to make a birdie on are set up for that, right? Hole number 1 gave us a good taste for that, right? With that front pin location that's also tucked a little bit close to the water. You're going to see some guys blow up tomorrow. I think you're going to see some guys at the top of the board shoot something like 4 or 5 over par. So like Valimaki, Ortiz would be prime candidates for that kind of performance. And then I think you're going to see some guys, it might even be a top end player, right? It might be somebody a little bit further back. I mean, there's like a -7, -8 round out there, right? Might even be like a -9, -10 round out there if the course conditions weather-wise can cooperate. I don't know. I'm liking this setup. It looks like a lot of fun. It looks like it's going to favor some of our chasers, right? Guys being a little bit aggressive. Does look like we might get some blow-ups, right? So just like I said, a few guys up top might blow up. These guys down low, like if they hit a few early water balls or they make, a double or two out there in their front 9, they're on full ejection watch. So it's going to be a extremely volatile day, I'll say. You're going to get some guys down here that break the slate, and you're going to get some guys that shoot 80 tomorrow. So kind of what we want for moving day. That's what we want to see with that leaderboard volatility. And it looks like they're giving us that from the golf course setup. Let's see, any questions, any comments out there for props? If not, we'll talk a little bit about the prop boards. Kazire thoughts. Always a decent play when it comes to upside, but he missed the cut, like you said. So, probably don't want to play him because he missed the cut. But, yeah, normally would be a really good option out there for Showdown. So I like the way that you were thinking. But in terms of a prop board, we have one. So let me refresh this. Let's see what we've got for projections and figure out what we're going to do. 5 birdies on a Jaeger. Okay. Nap at 4.5 might be a move. The guy is just hitting the ball so well right now. So even though I don't love him for Showdown, right? Like he has such a good floor because of how he's hitting the ball that I feel like I might take that. Let's see what we're working with though. And by the way, birdie average today was about like just over 4. So a little bit better than what we had for round 1. And with those pin locations, I think you're going to see it improve once again. So wouldn't surprise me to see something like a 4.5 birdie average, which is good context, right, for looking at this board. So Nap at 4.5 might be a move, right? Especially if I think the birdie average is going to be right about 4, maybe 4.5 tomorrow. But let's see what projections we've got here. So they've got Doug Gim at what? They don't have a birdie. Oh, sorry, 4.5 birdies. I was blind there for a second. 4.5 for a Rogers. Same thing for Hubbard as you'd expect. What do they have Fjordborn at? 5 birdies. Okay. Wish he was at 4.5. And then what do they have Keith Mitchell at 4.5 birdies? Okay. So I would say the birdie or better board, that was mostly what I was looking at there, going through that. Looks pretty accurate. I don't think it's that off in terms of their projections. Looks like there's a few guys at 4.5 that I'm going to want to take some overs on just because I do think that the conditions look ripe for the taking. Just trying to figure out the right ones, right? Because I don't think they're drastically off. I think you're going to see about a 4.5 birdie average. So it's trying to find guys that are top level birdie makers that'll gain birdies to the field, right? So I think one obvious choice would be Jake Knapp. They're at 4.5 birdies. I kind of want to avoid strokes out here for tomorrow just because of all those water ball pin locations, right? There are so many that look like they could trip up players that I don't know if I want to expose myself to that. So speaking of, bogey props are probably decent as well. So the bogey average today was a little bit over 2.5. I think it was close to 3 actually out there for the field. What I want to see is if we have anyone at 1.5 bogeys, which it doesn't look like we have that. I saw 2 for Hogard. We do have 1.5 for Tony Finau, which might be worth a look. It's not like I think Finau has a horrible day. It's just that with all those nasty pin locations next to water, I mean, you hit one bad approach shot, it's an instant bogey, right? You're not going to make a par after hitting it into the water on one of these holes. I don't know. It looks like Tony Finau is the only one they have at 1.5. But even somebody like him, I would be tempted to take that over at that sort of number. So we'll at least put it into the shopping cart for right now, that higher at 1.5. I don't love that it's a 0.9x here, right? So we'd only get paid 2.8x. In fact, it's probably enough to keep me off of playing that kind of slip. So we'll take it out of there, but just do know that I'm thinking about that as a potential lean. Let's see. Do we have anything on Prize Picks yet? We do. Let's see what we've got. So 4.5 birdies for a lot of players. I agree with that. Like, it looks like they have some of the lower tier guys up here. So they don't even have guys like a Jake Knapp on the board. They don't even have like an EVR. Actually, they do. They do have EVR up at 4.5 birdies. But they also have guys like Padraig Harrington up, right, at 4.5 birdies. So that's interesting to me, the kind of selection of players that they chose for their birdie or better board. Let's take a look at this. So they do have Knapp at 69 strokes. Kind of wanted to cross-reference that with the underdog line that we had. Let's see, 68.5. It seems like an appropriate line for these caliber of players. All right, digesting that. Let's see what we got with greens. 12.5 for some lower tier guys. Oh, this Jake Knapp 12.5 greens might be a vibe. He hardly missed a green all day today. In fact, he hit the ball to like 5 inches like 8 times. The kid's an absolute stud. So we'll go ahead and throw that into our cart over here on Prize Picks. And speaking of, I didn't look at any of these green and regulation marks. What do they have Knapp at over here on Underdog? I imagine a lot higher than 12.5. Let's see. So they have him at 13, so it's not that much higher than what they had him at over there in Prize Picks. But I would definitely lean on that over on Prize Picks. So we'll go ahead and throw him in there just to give you an idea of why I'm so bullish on taking a lot of his props. Take a look at this iron performance. Today, gained 4 strokes on approach, gained 1.7 strokes off the tee. That was 15 greens regulation, 11 fairways hit. And then in day 1, he had 17 greens regulation. That is ridiculous stuff. And gained over 2 strokes on approach. So that's the reason, right? I think that 12.5 number is so appetizing for Jake Knapp. It's because he's been by far the best iron player in this field. And it hasn't been relatively close over the first few rounds. I mean, just to give you an idea, right? His cumulative total for shots gained approach is nearly 6.5 strokes over just 2 days, right? In fact, he's number 1 in the field in shots gained approach and in shots gained off the tee. I mean, that is just the cream of the crop right there. Out there with what we're looking for. We're going to have to take that green and regulation prop. So we'll keep that one there. I don't know if we're going to take this 4.5 birdies. So let's go ahead and just try and lock something in here with Jake Knapp. So let's look at fairways, see what we got. Okay. Whole lot of inaccurate drivers at 8.5. So I'll probably pass on a lot of those. They do have Olesen at 12.5 greens. So that is intriguing. Harrington at 12.5. A few other guys here at 13 that I probably agree with. Let me double check on the average green and regulation percentage for today. So give me a second. I'll have the face cam up here while I do a little bit of analysis on the side. Just going to hop over to the live stats on Data Golf and calculate the live green and regulation average right now. In fact, we'll do the fairway average too out here. And I'll show you guys. I'll share my screen so you can see what we're doing. So 1 second. All right, so this is the Data Golf sheet, right? So if you go to their live stats, you can download this CSV. I believe it's a free feature. If not, my bad. But let's go through this average here. So it's this simple, by the way, if you just want to calculate these things. We have some nulls in here, I guess because of guys withdrawing. So let's do that. Let's not fuck up the data. So let's do that. That'll be the average for greens. This is going to be the average. Oh, wait, that didn't work. I did driving distance, not accuracy. Okay, so we're not going to have the fairway accuracy on here. I'll have to do that here in a second on another sheet. But let's see how many green and regulation per round that is, right? So it's 18 times that number we have there, and it is 11.85 per round. So a little bit under 12. We had about 12 greens of regulation for round 1, so it was slightly lower out there for round 2. I think with some of the pin locations, you're going to see the greens of regulation go up. And let me show you why on the pin sheet, because a lot of people don't think about this when it comes to strategy, right, out there when you're playing a golf course. But when you have so many pins that are next to the water, right, You tell yourself before you hit the iron shot, whether you're a pro golfer, whether it's you or me playing on the golf course, right? You go, I don't want to hit my fucking Pro V1 in that water, right? So you know what these tour players do on a hole like hole number 1? They hit it into the broad side of the green where you have all of this room to work with, right? So they're probably going to hit a green regulation there, you'd say, right? Hole number 9, where you have it kind of tucked over here in the water in the bunker. You know what players do? They hit it to the broad side of the green. 15, right? You know how I said it's going to be real hard to get it close to this pin location? Because you know what players do rather than hitting it at that pin? They hit it to the broad side of the green. Same thing with 17, right? Where you have that slightly tucked pin. I actually think that these pin locations, the ones that are closer to the water, are going to make that green and regulation average go up. So I like that for Jake Knapp. Look at that. I got freaking bumped live on stream here. What? So hi, lines makers. I'm out there, Jacob and Steven, if you're watching this live stream. Thanks for that, right? I'm flattered that you're bumping things before I can even enter them myself out here on the live stream. So crazy that they're out there with those kind of scummy tactics, but can't throw anything past Prize Picks. They'll do anything out there to try and protect their product. So I guess you got some hardworking lines makers who are going to be down here in chat moving those things. But in general, I still like Jake Knapp because of how well he's hitting the ball, right? So even at 13 greens, I would still be leaning on the over. But now that that's been bumped, maybe we take him for over on birdies, right? His putter has not really cooperated over the first 2 days. So some people would say that maybe we're due to see that regress. I mean, if he goes out there and he's even an average putter out there for tomorrow and then he hits the ball like he did today, I mean, that's like a -9 round, right? Which is, it's not realistic, right? I'm not expecting that whatsoever, but it does show you that he has a relatively high floor, right? He's playing so well at this point that it's going to be hard for him to play himself into like an extremely over par round. And what did he have for birdies today? He had what, 4 on the front 9, 3 on the back 9, so 7 for round 2. Day 1, he had 5 birdies, so he would have covered 4.5 for both days. It's probably a prop that we're going to take. So let me go ahead and bring up a few other sites. I'm going to do some line shopping on here, and we'll figure out what to take here for a stream slip. So just one moment while I bring up FanDuel and DraftKings, as they're usually our best bets for trying to do a little bit of line shopping. Okay, there's FanDuel, and there's DraftKings. All right. And if you have any questions for DFS or for props, just let me know down in the live chat, guys. I will still answer any questions that you've got. Appreciate the support as per usual. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. And let's get it for moving day. But no odds over here on FanDuel and no odds posted over here on DraftKings yet. So kind of unfortunate that we can't do any line shopping. But what it does mean is that when we get the live odds right out here at some point, which I imagine will probably be dropping in the next half an hour or so, we're going to have a lot of comparisons that we can do because these guys had to go out there and post prop boards without those odds to compare to. And I'll tell you what, they get it wrong a whole lot. So that's something that I'll be eyeing up a little bit later. In terms of props that we can take, though, let's find some value out here. So they got Mav at 12 greens. Like that's borderline disrespectful. Like I know he's not solid at hitting greens. In fact, I bet against him in round 1 to hit greens. But at 12, it's almost begging to take an over. So let's see what else we got for options. Aaron Rye at 12.5, right? He's posted at 13.5 on Prize Picks. I hate Aaron Rye. I don't know what it is about him. It's probably the 2 gloves. That's a spot that we might take over on this side. So let's throw him into the shopping cart for now, figure out what we're doing. We could take that over, right, on bogeys for Tony Finau. Just don't love the payout that we're getting, to be honest. Let's see. I'm telling you, these 12.5s I don't hate whatsoever. Like, I know the average was slightly under 12, but you're talking about players that are much better than average. And then those pin locations, which I think are going to slightly help these players hitting greens. And a lot of that's just psychological. It's not so much mechanical, right, out there with where the pin locations are. It's more so about what mentally that you have to do as a player. So yeah, I'm going to throw those 2 in there. They're good at hitting greens in regulation anyways. I want to make this a 3-man though. So I'm trying to find one more green in regulation prop to throw in. They have Aaron Wright 11.5 fairways. Oh boy. That's way, way too high. Oh my goodness. All right. We need to run the average now that I've seen that, because there's no reason for him to be at that high of a projection. That is That's absurd. There's only 13. By the way, the reason why that's absurd, there's only 13 fairways on this golf course, right? There's one less because there's one extra par 3. That is wild. Okay. So I'm bringing up Data Golf real quick. We're going to go through these stats together. There's no chance that he should be at that high of a projection. Like, there were guys today that hit all of their fairways. I'm sure Aaron Rai was probably one of them, right? If they're doing this with the projection, but that's insane. All right, so there's 13 fairways, right? There's not 14. So we're going to multiply this number by 13. So 8.58. So it actually went up. The fairway average actually did slightly go up out here for round 2, but it's only 8.5, right? That's 3 lower than what you have this Aaron Rai projection at. So, I'm going to be tempted to want to take that. I really like this over on greens, though. That's the issue, right? And because of how limited on Underdog, if I take one prop for somebody, I can't even enter another slip with that player. It's like, if we did this, right, we'd get slightly over a 3x payout. I don't hate that idea, to be honest. But at the same time, this 12.5 number is off. It's too low for an Aaron Rai. Let's see. We could take Champ and make this a little 3-man for 5.1x. I don't hate that. McNeely at 12 is, again, it's intriguing. I know he's not the best iron player, but it's worth a thought. Davis Thompson is another really good green and regulation guy. Just to show you what I'm talking about, let's bring up the stats from 2023. This is probably the slip that we're going to lock in, by the way. Those 3. So let's just show you why I'm locking in those 3. So in terms of green and regulation average, let's get these favorites out of there. I don't even know why I have those guys favorited. Aaron Rai was up there in terms of green and regulation percentage. I believe he was number 25 on the PGA Tour. Davis Thompson was also up there towards the top. He was number 34 on tour in terms of green and regulation percentage last year. And then Mark Hubbard, I don't think he was as elite as the other 2, but he was also pretty good at hitting greens, right? At number 68 on the PGA Tour. Those are all top 25 green and regulation guys in this field. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do that for a 5.14x payout, which I know it's not great, right? Normally you get 6x for a slip over here in Underdog, but what you have to remember is on Prize Picks, their main payouts are only 5x for a 3-man power. So it's really not that atrocious when you do that comparison. And we're getting that correlation between these 3 props, because if it does play to a slightly higher green and regulation average, which I think you're going to see with the talent gap right now that we've had a cut after the first 2 rounds, and the fact that we have some of those pins that are going to make guys more conservative, I like that for all 3 of these. So Davis Thompson, Hubbard, Rai, all players that are already good at hitting greens, will be the slip out here for the stream on Underdog. Now for Prize Picks, where these cheeky cunts are watching the stream and bumping things as we're going through it. Let's try and find you guys some value there and hopefully lock it in before they move it again, because that was wild. Grillo and Olesen at 4.5 birds. I like that. I like that a lot. Olesen, especially. Olesen's, I think he's a quality golfer, right? Did not have the best day today. Then you said Grillo, right? Grillo obviously had the good day today too. He's gone over that mark the first 2 rounds. I might tail that myself, man. I'm not against it. We'll at least throw him in the shopping cart. I think you're onto something there. I like EVR too. Just kind of spitballing ideas right here. I think he could be a potential over. But yeah, those would probably be my top 3 props right now, at least just based on what I've seen so far. I don't love strokes at this course, especially with all those water balls, right? Like I said, I kind of want to avoid this market just because I could see it going sideways real quickly. It's not like I expect these guys to hit it in the water, but if it happens, it's just so fucking tilting. There's nothing like it. Happened with like 4 or 5 of my guys today. I had a real average prop day. It wasn't really that great. And it was all because of slips going 1 and 2 because of guys hitting the ball in the water on random holes. It was just, if you can't tell, I'm slightly scarred from the fact that happened today. So that's why I'm trying to stay away from it. What tee times will I be targeting tomorrow? And also, are there any key stats to take into consideration? So yeah, in terms of tee times, if you want my full take on it, check out the weather section, which was at the beginning of the live stream. But I am targeting the first half of tee times. I think the guys that are -3, -4 are ripe for the taking. They're going to be lower owned. They're going to be playing in slightly lower winds, also more receptive greens. That's the prime time to attack. In terms of key stats, I would look at approach stuff over the first 2 days, right? That's always important out there for Showdown. But I would also look at birdie or better percentage. For Showdown in general, we want guys that are going to go out there and fill it up with the flat stick, make a bunch of birdies. And that's what you want to target for Showdown, right? I think a lot of people forget about the aspect, how birdie heavy the scoring is. Make sure to lean into that, right? Look at birdie or better percentage. Rye under 11.5, it is a lot. Like you said, it's a lot. You're feeling Brandon Wu going nuclear. I could see that, Jimmy. He had a good round today. I took advantage of that, that's for sure. But yeah, he has an insane track record here. So it'd be hard to bet against him. That's for damn sure. And I got to say, Asian, I'm kicking myself for not taking it like a 50-50. I wish I put like 50 on the Rye over on greens and then like the other 50 on the under 11.5 fairways. Because you're right, it is a lot. It's a lot too many. He can only miss one fairway and go over. He misses 2 fairways, he goes under that projection, which even for an elite level driver is asking a whole lot. You're 100% spot on there. Let's figure out what we're going to do for prize picks, though, which honestly, fuck them for moving those props. That is absolutely scum behavior if I've ever seen one before. Which is unsurprising as somebody that's met the lines makers there. It does not surprise me whatsoever based on their character. But let's figure out what we're going to do here. So we could take some unders and strokes, but like I said, I kind of want to avoid those just because of the water balls that are in play. So we're probably going to take one of these, a combination of these birdie props. I don't love the 3-man at 4.75x. All right, that 5.14x was decent over there in Underdog. Not as thrilled about this kind of payout. So I'm going to try and make it a 2-man for the 2.75x. And it's kind of tough to choose between these three. So let's just do it based on their shots gained tee to green. So let's go ahead, sort this by shots gained tee to green. Erik van Rooyen's number 2. So he is definitely holding his spot. And then who are the other two, right? We're choosing between Grillo and then Thorbjorn. It's probably going to be Grillo, I'd have to imagine, right? So they've got Grillo, right? He's up there in like the top 15 of shots gained tee to green. And actually, Thorbjorn has him slightly beat. So it's good to see that all 3 of those players, right, are up there towards the top of shots gained tee to green. And in fact, we're just going to play the 3-man. My limit, by the way, let's see. Is it higher for like larger stuff? Let's see. Probably not, right? Daily maximum amount is 2,000. Well, considering I had like $30 of slips in, I highly doubt I'm over $2,000. Let's see. Can I enter $10 slip? I can. Look at that. I figured the limit might be slightly higher out there for like a 3-leg slip. My limit for 2-mans is $5, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Sweet. We'll go with that out there for our 3-man. So I don't love the payout at 4.75x. My volume over here on Prize Picks is much lower than what I have on Underdog. So I'm not that worried about the slight payout difference. It's these projections are better than the ones we can get on Underdog. Right? They have Thorbjorn at 5 birdies. I believe Grillo and Van Rooyen are at 4.5 themselves, but they're at slightly worse multipliers, right? Like I know at least one of those two was at 0.9x. So just do that comparison, right? 0.9x out there for Erik van Rooyen, and then for Emiliano Grillo, I believe he was also a 0.9x. Let's double check, right? 5 birdies out there for Thorbjorn. And then actually they have Emiliano Grillo up at 5 birdies already. So we're getting a little bit of a line discrepancy with 2 of those. Also, right, the 0.9x over there with EVR. Solid value comparatively between the 2 sites. So a few slips that I'd take out there for round 3, but there'll be a lot more coming over here in Underdog. So as per usual, guys, for access to those spreadsheets you saw before for DFS, check out the Patreon page. And of course, for access to all of the different prop slips that I'm entering for Saturday, make sure to check it out as well. As soon as we're getting off a stream here, that is exactly what I'm going to be diving into. So make sure to check it out there. And last night, I ended up waiting till the morning to enter slips. I'm probably not going to do that this time. There looks to be some value out there that we can attack. So let's make sure to take advantage. Let's see if there's any last second questions. And if not, we're hopping on out of here. We got a question about the Jaeger over Rio matchup. And just like from the top level perspective, that makes a lot of sense, right? You've got somebody in Jaeger who's playing better than Rio. The only negative, right, they're wanting to take Jaeger over Rio would be the tee time, right? Because Rio's going off early. He'll be playing in some of the best conditions. Jaeger's going off a little bit later, right? So might be playing in slightly harder conditions. One thing I'll say is that Jaeger is playing a lot better than Hisatune to this point. So that probably makes up for that slight difference. So I would lean on the over for Steven Yeager. I would prefer, though, to find a matchup with one of these top level guys going against another guy going off late that's a lower tier player, right? So let's find an example of that, right? Which there might not be, right? They're usually pretty good at setting up these matchups. They try to avoid that sort of thing. But let's see if we can find that kind of matchup. So it doesn't look like it so far. Yeah, they do a pretty good job at setting these up. So if you can find one of those matchups, right, where you can find that perfect combination of the same tee time and that talent discrepancy, then definitely attack those. But yeah, not my favorite category on Prize Picks, that's for sure. Especially after the lines makers told me to my face that they were their most profitable category. That was the last straw for me in wanting to bet them. But that's all I've got for this live stream, guys. I appreciate all the support here as usual. If you're watching this on replay, let me know down in the comments who you think goes the lowest tomorrow. If you had to place one bet out there for your lowest score prop, who's it going to be, right? And if you're live, let me know your thoughts as well on who you think is going to be the lowest score tomorrow. If I had to give my guess on it, the chalk answer is Jake Knapp, but we're going to go way, way more outside the box on it. So let me circle back to my projections, and we're going to say Carl Yuan is the low round of the day. So hopefully out there for my boy Tom and Marty's that has, I think it's like $7,000 on Carl Yuan to win. Hopefully he comes through for you, right? Rune for you. Have my own outright on Carl myself, and that'd be an epic way to end moving day. But that's all I've got, guys. Appreciate the support, like I said before, and let's go out there and win some money tomorrow.